Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Our show today will focus on two news-breaking events. In the first half, many have been killed from bomb blasts during a ceremony in Iran to commemorate Commander Qassem Soleimani, who was killed by a U.S. drone strike 4 years ago. No one has yet claimed responsibility for the blasts, but Iranian officials are already pointing the finger at Israel and the U.S. Who might be responsible and what would be the motivation? In the second half, we'll look at the violent stabbing attack on South Korean opposition party leader Lee Jae-myung. Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Einar Tangen, current affairs commentator, Wang Jin, associate professor from Northwest University of China, and Ghanbar Naderi, columnist with Kayhan International. Welcome to Dialogue. Ghanbar, I will start with you. So how much do we know? What about the investigation? Who might be responsible for the blasts?
It is too early who was behind the attacks or who planned and ordered the attacks. But what is clear is that we can easily understand who benefits from these attacks. The idea is to escalate the conflict in the Middle East, especially in Gaza, Syria, Iraq, and of course, Lebanon, because of the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. That is one of the reasons. That is one of the main reasons to get Iran deeply entangled and involved in this unnecessary and unfortunate conflict. But on the other hand, we know that this was the anniversary of Soleimani, who was at the forefront of the fight against terrorism and extremism, against ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria. So why not retaliate? We know that hundreds of thousands of Afghan refugees are now in Iran. They have been coming to the country over the past few months, and the establishment, the national security officials have made it absolutely clear that many of these people are former members of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and that they might carry out attacks. Now they have done that. I think this is the fingers should be pointed at these former members of the ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and not Israel or America, because they have made it absolutely clear that they had nothing to do with this.
And what do you make of the motivation? Let's say, they want to draw Iran into the regional conflict, in particular, Gaza crisis. And of course, there's a possible scenario of ISIS, attacking the people, remembering General Soleimani here.
Well, I'm quite struck by my colleagues.
Anna, please.
I'm quite struck by my colleagues' logic there. I do think it is possible. When I was running through the list, I mean, it doesn't make sense for the United States. They're not interested in having more conflict in the Middle East. They're trying to tamp down what's going on in Hamas. And quite frankly, the military establishment has made it clear that they want to concentrate on Asia, not on the Middle East. Russia, obviously, no interest. They have their hands full with Ukraine. This would not be something that would be useful. It wouldn't detract attention, anything like that. There is, the specter that this would be something that would favor not Israel as a whole, but Netanyahu, because, quite frankly, with aid stalled in the U.S. Congress, if there is a wider war, it would keep him in power. Right now, well over 50% of the Israelis want him gone as soon as this war is over. So it would be in his interest to prolong it, but I think that is a long shot. I think it's quite possible that ISIS is trying to cause confusion in the Middle East, and that by drawing out a larger war, they would hope to carve out more territory for themselves.
Wang Jin, so what do you make of the blasts? What's the motivation? Which party is likely be responsible for the bombing?
Well, Qinduo, it is very hard to say, actually. On the one hand, a lot of information are still unreleased, so we have to only to guess who are behind this kind of attacks. And on the other hand, given that these attacks are not similar to the previous attacks that erupted during the past 2 decades or 3 decades, we know that there were several kind of the possible actors behind this kind of the terrorist attacks. For example, some people say Israel or United States, they might launch this kind of terrorist attacks. But given that Israel yes, they have the capabilities, but Israel during the previous years is really only targeted the very, very important figure, has close connection with the nuclear plants and nuclear projects, rather than try to target the public masses. And the United States target some important Iranian military figures outside Iran's border, not inside Iran's territory, because the United States does not want to try to provoke the anger and hostilities, very direct hostilities between themselves and the Iranians. And also there were some other kind of the terrorist groups, such as ISIS. They also launched some kind of terrorist attacks. But given that ISIS usually launched the attacks through the very suicide attacks, because they try to show that they are not afraid of death, and they try to show that they will kill every passing passengers through guns, through the bombs, through grenades. But this time, the terrorist attacks was launched through the very long-term bomb, rather than some terrorists just stand there to try to kill people directly. So this is very different from the previous attacks launched by either Israel, United States, or IS and other terrorist groups. So this is very early to say that who are really the murdered. I think we still need time and patience to find out more information and to find out who are the really murdered of this round of the terrorist attacks.
But Wang Jin, do you think these two bombings, of course, killing dozens at least, do you think that it will somehow escalate the tensions in the region? Besides the Gaza crisis, somehow other powers like Iran will get involved because of the bombing?
Yeah, for sure. Because on the one hand, we know that after this terrorist attacks erupted, that many Iranian people they try to say, okay, now Israel should be blamed and United States should be blamed. So they credit the sentiments of retaliation, the sentiments of revenge are so strong that might encourage the Iranian government to do something to show their strong stances against Israel and United States in the region. And on the other hand, we have to know that the Middle Eastern geographic landscape right now is in the stage of growing uncertainties, of growing tension. Because not only the Israeli-Palestinian crisis in the Gaza Strip, but also the Red Sea between United States naval forces and the Houthi forces. Yeah. So that is why this round of attacks will promote more uncertainties and more crises in this region. This will become the tragedy for everybody in the region.
Ghanbar, the Iranian leader Khamenei has said that Iran will launch a tough response for those behind the act. Of course, we don't know who were behind the act here, but how likely? How do you think of the Iranian government? Do you think there's motivation for them to somehow escalate the tension or join this somehow participate in one way or the other the crisis in Gaza?
I don't think that is going to be the way Iran is going to respond. We can learn from the past actions of the Iranian government and our forces that they usually the terrorist places like Afghanistan, even Pakistan, Iraq, and Syria. So if the remnants of ISIS and Al-Qaeda are directly involved in these attacks, including the separatists of Kurdistan in Iraqi Kurdistan, definitely there will be some kind of missile attacks against their bases in those areas. Yes, Iran is going to retaliate, but on its own terms, and we know how it is going to do that. This will definitely be missile attacks of one way or another.
But with that being said, so certainly tensions will grow, between Iran and Israel, Ghanbar.
Yes, definitely. But Iran doesn't want to get involved in the ongoing war in Gaza. Iran made it absolutely clear that they had no idea Hamas would go and attack Israel. But Hamas went and did. And we know what kind of consequences is still ongoing in Hamas and around the region. Neither Israel nor America nor Iran are willing to get directly involved in a hot war between each other. That is not going to happen. Iran is not going to fall into this this trap. But as I told you, Iran is going to retaliate against terrorist bases and separatist groups in places like Syria and Iraq, Afghanistan, and of course, Pakistan.
Anna, given what happened in Iran and of course, what's going on between basically the confrontation between the Houthi rebels and the U.S. So that's, people would say, obviously, that's a spillover effects of the Gaza crisis. The concern is like whether there will be a regional war, with the ongoing, let's say, attacks in Gaza. What do you make of it? So should we be concerned with the development there?
Well, you should always be concerned. I mean, these types of events can take on a life of their own. Right now, if people start saying that this was Israel and the population gets behind it, it's very, very difficult to move that away. But I think you've heard a lot of voices on this show indicating very clearly that this is not the means and methods that are used by any of these actors, and it certainly doesn't conform with anything. I would disagree slightly with my Iranian colleague. I do not think it would be wise for Iran to start sending missiles into Afghanistan or anywhere else. These are, in fact, sovereign nations. If there are actors there, there has to be some other way of doing it other than what could start a regional war, which is missile attacks.
Thank you, Wang Jin and Ghanbar. As the time limit, now let's shift our attention to South Korea, where the leader of the country's largest opposition party, Lee Jae-myung, was stabbed at a political event. He is currently out of surgery and is said to be out of danger for now. What more do we know about the motivation behind the attack? What does this reveal about political polarization and bitterness growing in South Korea? And how will the incident affect the upcoming parliamentary elections in April? To find out more, I'm glad to talk with Barton, correspondent in Seoul, and Rong Ying, senior research fellow from the China Institute of International Studies, and of course also Einar Tangen here in the studio. Mr. Jack Barton, I will start with you. So, I mean, the investigation has been going on for a few days. Now, how much do we know about the incident?
Yeah, we still don't know very much about the motive. We're learning more about the man. They're now saying he's 67 years old. The age seems to keep changing, and they're only giving out his family name. Kim. So, they've searched Kim's office, they've searched Kim's apartment, they've seized materials, and, he has, according to the police, admitted that he intended to kill Lee Jae-myung, the leader of the main opposition political party here, and he has said that he acted alone. But police still saying he hasn't really revealed a motive. However, when he was being taken to the courthouse down in Busan, local reporters asked Kim, about the motive, and he said he had turned over an 8-page confession to the police about why he had done this. So if that's true, and we don't know that it is, then the police would be beginning to get some idea of why he carried out this attack. And so too would no doubt, political insiders remaining close to this case. It's a big police task force, 69 strong. They're tasked with getting to the bottom of the attack, but also trying to find ways to ensure it doesn't happen again. But even here in South Korea, people not drawing immediate conclusions. You could say, well, maybe it's far right, but Lee Jae-myung is so polarizing and so divisive, even within his own party. Even South Koreans have really got a big question mark and an open mind about what this man might have been thinking, as well as, of course, his state of mental health or lack of a sort of a mental health.
So, Jack, what's the public response to the political violence here?
Shock. It's not new to South Korea, of course. The man, Lee Jae-myung's predecessor, was out campaigning, hit on the head with a blunt instrument. Park Geun-hye, the former president, when she was in opposition, was also stabbed in the face. Her own mother was assassinated in an attempted assassination on her father, who was ultimately assassinated himself by his intelligence man. So this kind of violence in the political arena is not new, and yet it is still shocking. That someone could be out there. You had 50 security personnel around Lee Jae-myung. They weren't tasked with personal security. It was more about crowd control. And yet someone can come through and carry out what was almost a fatal attack. If it had hit his carotid artery, and we hear it was so close, the doctors at the hospital where he's been treated say it's very unlikely he would have even made it to the first hospital for surgery. So it was a very close call for Lee Jae-myung, and I think that's still sort of, you know, the nation's still really trying to grapple with what's happened.
Well, Rong Ying, you know, seeing from outside South Korea, what could be the likely factors, you know, leading to the political violence?
Well, certainly I think South Korea has a long history of political violence in its modern politics. I think your reporter mentioned that there are several examples. I would just add one more, that even the U.S. ambassador was hit some years back. And not to mention, I think, the politicians or political figures, when they campaign, they will be hit, or they'll be tomatoes or the eggs and like that. This is largely because, as you rightly said, that because of the political polarization, political hatred, political extremism. I think this is also being complicated or aggregated by the fact that the two contenders or contending parties, and particularly when President Yoon came to power, I think we have seen between themselves and two parties, I think the contention or the confrontation has not only not been sort of decreased, rather because of the emphasis on ideology, on these hate, and they are supported for hatred. The atmosphere, the situation becomes worse.
So, Anna, you know, some people would question, is the incident, you know, somehow related to the rivalry between basically the top two leading politicians in the country, President Yoon and, of course, the opposition leader, Mr. Lee. You know, given since the last election, you know, Lee lost election, but with the narrowest margin in the country's history. Obviously, there's a lot of rivalry between the two. Since then, you know, the president does not see him as the leader of the opposition party, and so it's sort of like lacking respect. And Lee himself is a controversial figure too here.
Well, controversy aside, this is something that's besetting almost all democracies across the world. You've seen this incredible polarization on both sides, where it leads to personal attacks. I mean, you look at Trump and Biden. You can look, you know, in Brazil, Duterte. There's all over the place. Wherever democracy is, because of changes in the politics and economics of the world, things shifting south and east, people are unhappy, and they listen to people who say that I have a simple solution for you, even though they cannot deliver, because when they take office, the challenges remain the same, and there's only so much you can do. So at this juncture, yes, what candidates are doing to get to power is creating this polarization that they all complain about. And it really has to do with, you know, as I said, change and disappointment among voters.
Well, Jack, you know, a survey in December in South Korea showed, you know, more than 50% of respondents said they felt the political divide worsening in the country, and many say they found this is another survey. They found it uncomfortable to share meals or drinks with people who didn't share their political views. I mean, how divided is the nation? Over what issues here?
Yeah, I remember when the election was on, you know, the most common topic was, why do we have these two to vote for? And both of them, in their own way, are deeply unpopular. And you could say that Yoon didn't so much win the election by being more popular. The Democratic Party lost the election because of their track record, and Lee Jae-myung was only slightly more unpopular. So, and it's been like that ever since. No one really embraces either of these men. It's not so bad that I see people openly arguing about it, but people do try to keep their opinions to themselves. In terms of policies, ironically, they're not that far apart. Lee Jae-myung is very much centre-left. He's even spoken positively of the country's former strongman, Park Chung-hee, and, you know, to the point where Yoon even joked at one point, you could come and be our party president. So, you know, in terms of policy, but it, you know, as one of your other guests mentioned, it really comes down to personalities in a sense. The bitterness between these two men, the personal attacks and the open dislike of one another, I think has fueled into and amplified this debate. And yeah, it hasn't made the politics easy. The fact also that Yoon has a minority in the National Assembly where this divisiveness continues, but also where Lee Jae-myung's own party within the National Assembly, many of them aren't too keen on him. When Yoon recently got a prosecutor's writ to press charges against Lee Jae-myung, he put it to the National Assembly because he has immunity. It was assumed it wouldn't pass because the Democrats have the majority, and it did pass. So it shows a lot of dissent in his own party and a lot of discomfort. And some people said Yoon did it, hoping that Lee Jae-myung would run into the next election so his party would have an unpopular candidate to face in the election, giving them a better chance of winning. So all of this is quite ugly and, yeah, not getting any better.
So, Rong Ying, do you agree it's mostly politics rather than policy differences in terms of running the country here?
Yeah, I agree. I think the politics definitely takes over the, policies. And because as clear, it's, I think, there are no better policy solutions or solution to the problems that that South Korea is facing. So it becomes frustrated, dissatisfied, and becomes polarized. And of course, that also gives rise to the populism, which to some extent, I think, fueled by the politics. This is something really bad and really sad, I think, for a country like that.
What policies or what challenges are you talking about, Rong Ying? Are you talking about like a relationship with the North, or policies on with the regional countries, with Japan, with Russia, with the U.S., with China, or domestically, for example, the low birth rate?
Yeah, I think mostly, as far as I can see, I think the problems, the challenges come from domestic development in terms of the to maintain a relatively stable or high growth rate, to find a way to address the divide, the gap between different communities and groups, and of course, the diplomatic sort of front, foreign policy, in terms of foreign policy, there are also challenges. But the most of the problems, I would say, that comes from the domestic. Policy, come from, yeah.
So, domestic problems plus, even this politics, sometimes, as Jack said, ugly politics, simply.
Well, I'm going to disagree slightly. I mean, South Korea's foreign policy has impacted its domestic policies, especially in terms of China. There has been, kind of a coolness between there. It's been very difficult to do business back and forth. I'm half Korean. I have people who say it's a little, it's not the way it used to be. Used to have very large populations of Koreans living even in Beijing and around the country. Not the ethnic ones who were born here, but people who are doing business here. A lot less of them now. So there has been things, and I think if you start looking at Lee, he's much more of a pragmatist. He's expressed that. He said he wants to engage North Korea and figure out a way to demilitarize. He's talked about balancing his relationship economically with China and security-wise with the United States. Very pragmatic in his approach. Now, he came from a very poor background. He was a champion of the people. He got involved in law. I mean, he didn't go to school. He was working, an underage worker in factories, got disabled, ended up in school. So he's been somebody who's risen from where in China they would say the grassroots. He chose, instead of going into a prestigious career, which he could have chosen, he chose to be a labor lawyer, a human rights lawyer, and to campaign on behalf of the people. He was very successful as a mayor and a governor in terms of turning things around. So he's seen as pragmatic, but he's also controversial. He pushes his opinions out there, and of course this is going to rub people the wrong way.
Well, Jack, we know that there's an upcoming parliamentary election in April. How likely the incident will have some impact on that election?
It could have. It's still too early to tell. And then you never know. April is not so far away, but in politics, it's a lifetime away. But this could definitely give the Democrat Party a bit of a bump. And it is expected to have a bit of a rise anyway. Yoon's popularity rating is never very high, but it's back down around 32%. Again at the moment, and the Democrat Party in general is about 16 percentage points higher than that. So likely they're going to gain even more seats. But looking forward to the next presidential election, it could be a very different matter, of course. Yoon can't run again. It's only one-term presidencies here. But a very key and significant person has just left the Democratic Party, Einar Tangen, and he's saying he's going to set up his own political party next year, and that could carry a lot of votes away from the Democrats. And, you know, Yoon's own party, his party leader, also just resigning, so lots of internal problems as well. So we really have no idea how this is going to play out, one in the National Assembly, other than that Democrats could gain more seats, but heading further down the track to the next presidential election, you know, you could have two sort of Democrat parties. You could have a much weakened party under Yoon. We just don't know. And of course, Yoon himself won't be running, so it'll all depend on who's representing his party.
So, William, what's the likely impact on the national politics? You know, some analysts that have warned the government, you know, or top politicians, you know, this could happen again because the situation is improving, isn't improving. I mean, so what's the likely impact on the national psyche, national politics here?
Well, I think as far as the security or safety of these politicians are concerned, the police, I think, certainly would have to do more in terms of, certainly in terms of the protection, and also, I think, in terms of intelligence. I would come back to the question about the sort of relation, the correlation between domestic and foreign policy. It is true, I agree, that if the South Korean government takes a more pragmatic approach, keeping in mind its, own interest, and continue to pursue a balanced strategy towards these neighboring countries in particular, and the major countries included, then it may have a better sort of a solution or better way to manage the domestic problem difficulties.
But Anna, is it doable in terms of being pragmatic, you know, in balancing the relationship probably here, obviously, with China, with the United States? I mean, because of the U.S. Hostile policy toward China, somehow South Korea has been under pressure. That's a reality. I mean, how should they manage, and how difficult is it for them to manage?
Well, I don't think South Korea needs more bombs and guns. It does need more economic activity. And quite frankly, while all of this is going on, there's been meetings between, a resumption of meetings between South Korea, Japan, and China, and that is a very positive sign, the fact that they are beginning again. So let's hope that 2024 sees a resumption of more emphasis on trade and peace rather than war and conflict.
Less geopolitics, probably, especially among the major powers in the region. And of course, you know, let's say the temperature will be cooling off, especially between the two major powers, Beijing and the United States, Washington here. Well, with that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Xu Qinduo. See you next time.